Okay, so first of all, this is an example of an argument that you might see in section 3-6. And it is two statements that say Paris is in France, and it also says Paris is in Europe. Therefore, France is in Europe. Therefore, Paris is in Europe. The first two parts of that they are called premises. Okay, and the second part on the bottom is called a conclusion. So these are the three things that you need for an argument. You have to have at least two premises and then a conclusion. Okay? The argument consists of two parts, as I say right here, premises and conclusion. An argument is valid if the conclusion is true whenever the premises are assumed to be true. An argument that is not valid is said that to be an invalid argument, also called a fallacy. Okay, so last week we talked a little bit about the Menendez brothers trial. And the first example I have is what the prosecution stated as their argument. In this one, they said that if the children murder their parents in cold blood, they deserve to be punished to the full extent of the law.
Can you write this down?
You don't have to write this down.
Okay.
This was premise 1. Premise 2 is the children murdered their parents in cold blood. And then the conclusion was, therefore, these children need to be punished to the full extent of the law. Now, in your book, what's going to happen when you're doing your homework is you're going to see probably 3 statements like this. Okay? And you're going to break them down into premises. And you also need to break them down into statements, like these first ones right up here. So what I did is I took these statements out of these premises. So P, I decided would be children murder their parents in cold blood, and Q is they deserve to be punished to the full extent of the law. So based on that, I wrote the symbolic phrase right here next to the first premise. And then I wrote the symbolic phrase of the second premise, and then you have this therefore. Notice there's 3 dots here. That means therefore. Okay? So if I were going to write this all together, I'm going to take the first premise and write it inside of here and connect it with the second premise with an and statement. Notice the and statement here. And then the conclusion would be an if-then statement to Q. Okay? So, in other words, if premise 1 and premise 2, then the conclusion. So what I would do with this particular one is I would want to see if this is a valid statement, a valid argument. So I'm going to take this and put it on my next page, and I'm actually going to go through and make a truth table and check it. You don't have to write this down either. I'll have other ones for you to write down later. So the first thing I want to do is break this truth table down. I have P, then Q. It is an if-then statement, so what am I looking for? First a true and then a false, and I have them right here, and then that would make it a false. Everything else would be a true. The next part I want to look at an and, so I'm going to write this out right here. It'll be P, then Q, and P. We're looking for what with an and? 2 truths. So on this we have a true and a true on the top. So this will be a true. Everything else will be false. I'm going to copy over my Q here because on an if-then statement like we have coming up here, order matters. So because this is an if-then statement and this is all going in this part right here, I'm looking for first a true, then a false. Do you see any of those in this?
Yeah, the second one.
The second one's that's 2 falses.
The last. Oh wait, sure.
That's also 2 falses.
Oh. No, it's coming to
No, there's no first true, then a false. So this is all going to be truths. What is that called again?
Tautology.
A tautology. Very good. Okay, so in an argument, Whenever you have a tautology, it's a valid argument. Okay? So, this is what I do want you to write down. Because the conditional statement is a tautology, the argument is valid. And this is generally the way it is written.
So the argument will only be valid if the statement is tautology.
Yes, it's only valid if all of that whole column is true. Okay, so I just showed you an example with the Menendez brothers trial example, but to be specific, these are the 5 steps you must do to find out if an argument is valid or not. So the first thing you're going to want to do is turn the statements into symbols. So you're going to have a P statement, a Q statement, and sometimes you might have an R statement there too. The second part, you're going to want to express which ones are premises and the conclusion and put them in symbols also. Put it together symbolically. And then you're going to take the entire thing and put it in one conditional statement. So if you notice, you always put your premises on the left side, and they all have an and statement in between them. And they're kind of listed out. You might have you might have 2 premises, or you might have a whole bunch of them, depending on how complicated the argument is.
What's premise and?
That means like the nth premise. You can go up to
It's like whatever.
however number premises you have. You're going to list them out. Okay, and then you always have an if-then statement between them, and then the conclusion on the other side.
Will there always be and?
Yes, there's always and between the premises.
And that will never change.
Nope. That'll be the same forever. Okay? Number 4, you're going to construct a truth table for step 3, and you're going to see if it comes out to have a tautology. So number 5, if the final column is a tautology, then the argument is valid. Okay, so this one is an example from the book. Okay, there's 3 statements here. It says the U.S. must energetically support the development of solar-powered cars or suffer increasing atmospheric pollution. Okay, the second one says the U.S. must not suffer increasing atmospheric pollution. And the third one says, therefore, the U.S. must energetically support the development of solar-powered cars. So basically, you could write this out as this being the conclusion, this being premise 1 up on top.
So those 3 dots mean?
Therefore. Okay? And the second one being premise 2. So what you're going to want to do, first of all, is to write out your simple statement. So P in this case is going to be the U.S. Must energetically support the development of solar-powered cars. Okay, Q would be U.S. suffers increasing atmospheric pollution. So that is the first step you're going to take when you're writing these out. Okay? Then, now we need to set this out as our first premise, premise 1, is the U.S. must energetically support the development of solar-powered cars or suffer increasing atmospheric pollution. So how would I put that in symbolic form? Yep. P or Q in this case, because our statements are right here. Okay? Premise 2, yes, and not just Q, but it's going to be a not. So this would be a not Q. Okay? And then we have our conclusion on the bottom, therefore. So our U.S. must energetically support the development of solar power cars. That would be a P. Okay, so as you recall from the page before, if I were to make an overall conditional statement from this, what's going to separate my two premises? So this is an and. And will be between them. Notice that this is my premise 1. This is my premise 2. And then I'm going to have my conclusion over here. This is going to be P. It will be whatever is on the bottom. So it's based on the bottom statement that you see. No, not necessarily. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to copy this to my next page because we're going to make a truth table on this. Okay, so now we want to check to see if this is a valid argument using a truth table. So this is part 4 of the 5 things you're supposed to do. So we're going to make a truth table with P and Q. Starting off with our basic truth table. So what's the next column? What should it be? We could do a not Q. So that would be an F, T, F, T.
Can we do the
Not yet, but we can do it the or.
or the or?
Yep. Yep. So P or Q. If it's an or statement, we are looking for two falses. So here we have them right here. So this part right here will also be a false. Everything else will be a true. And now we're going to put those last 2 columns together in an and statement. So if it's an and statement, what are we looking for? 2 truths. We have 2 right here. So this is going to be a true. Everything else will be a false. I'm just going to copy the P because I want to have it in order. Remember, the first column has to have a true, the second has to have a false. So I'm going to copy my P over here, and then I'm going to put them all together. The project is due Tuesday. Next week. Okay. So, if it's an if-then statement, I'm looking for first a true and then a false. Do you notice any truths then falses over here? No, there isn't any. There's none. So they're all going to be truths. So that is a tautology. Then it's valid. Hey.
When it's an if-then statement, the true false equals a false.
Yes, if it's first true then a false, then you would have a false, but there's none of those on here. So this is a little bit simpler. It says, I studied for 5 hours or I failed. I did not study for 5 hours, therefore I failed. So you can basically look at this as the first 2 being the premises and the last one being the conclusion. So this first one's your premise 1. This is premise 2. And this is your conclusion. One of the things I need to do first before I go any further is to make my simple statements. So what would be my P? I studied for 5 hours. Good.
I'm sorry.
Oh my God.
What would be the Q? I fail.
Not being done.
Yep. So, based on that, look at premise 1. How would I write premise 1 in symbolic form?
P or Q.
Okay, P or Q. How about premise 2?
Not P.
Not Q.
Not P.
Oh, not P? Yep, not P. Did not study for 5 hours. Therefore, I failed, which would be Q. All right? So now based on this, I need to make a conditional statement. What am I going to separate my two premises with?
With the or.
Not an or, but a and. Good. It just always is, because you want them together.
It always is?
It's always an and. Okay? This is always an and.
So the or is in.
Yeah, because that's the first one. All right, so here's my symbolic form of my conditional statement. So step 4 would be to actually go through and find the truth table for it. So if I did that, I have P, oops, undo, sorry about that. P, then Q. So true, true, false, false. True, false, true, false. Okay, got those two down. Now what am I going to do?
Do not P.
Okay, do a not P. That would be a false, false, true, true.
P or Q.
P or Q. It's an or statement, so I'm looking for what?
Double false.
Two falses. So that's right here. So this will be a false. Everything else will be a true. Okay, so I'm going to put these together. It's an and statement. We're looking for two truths. Right here. So this will be a true right here. And then it's a if-then statement, so I'm just going to copy my Q. So we're looking for a true to be in this column right here, and a false to be in this column. Do we have anything that's first true and then a false? There is none, so it's all trues, right? So this is a valid argument. Okay, so remember the Menendez brothers. We're back to them again. And this is the defendant's argument. The first part is, if the children murder their parents because they fear abuse, they are mitigating circumstances for murder. The second part is, if there are mitigating circumstances for murder, then the children deserve a lighter sentence. Therefore, if the children murder their parents because they fear abuse, they deserve a lighter sentence. So the first thing we need to do, folks, is to put this down into 3 simple statements. And I can see the first statement is right here. That's your P statement. Okay? So this is P. This next one is Q. And it's also located in the first part of the next sentence. So those two are Q. And then the last one is the children deserve a lighter sentence. That's R. Okay? So if I were going to write this out in symbolic form for the whole thing, the first one is, if the children murder their parents because they fear abuse, there are mitigating circumstances to the murder. So the first statement would be a P, then Q like this. Okay, that was premise 1. Premise 2 is what? you write premise 2 in symbolic form? Q. Yep, then R. Good. Okay, and then our conclusion would be, oops, yep, P then R. Okay? So notice that this conclusion doesn't have just a simple statement. It has an if-then statement. Okay, so if I were going to go do the step 4 now at this point, is I'm going to put my two premises together and separate them by a what? An and. And then an if-then, and then P or R like this. So that is my compound conditional statement. I'm going to copy this to the next page so that I can do the truth table. There you are. So let's do the truth table for this. We have a P, whoops, need a pen. We have a P, a Q, and R. How many rows am I going to have? I'm going to have 8. So it's going to be true, 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 true. Whoops, sorry. False, 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 false. So there's my basic truth table for three simple statements. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to look at is P, then Q. So it's a conditional. We're going to look for a true and then a false. And I only see one, and that's right there. Okay, so that's going to be a false. Oh, right underneath it. You're right. So that will also be a false. The rest will be true. Okay, now I'll do the same thing for Q then R. So we have a true then a false here, and a true and a false here. That'll be a false, that'll be a false. Everything else will be true for those. Then let's put those two together with an and statement. So it's an and we're looking for two what?
Truths.
Two truths. We have one right here, one right here, and then here, and here. Okay? So that'd be a true, false, false, false. True, false, true, true. Okay, now I want to find out P then R, if P then R. So I'm looking for first a true and then a false. And I have one right here. So that'll be a false right there. I have another one right here. Everything else will be a true. Now we can put it all together. We're looking for first a true on this column right here, and then a false on this column. So, do I have any first truths and a false? I don't. So it is a tautology, which means what? It's valid. I missed a T somewhere in here. Right here. Okay, so this is a valid argument.